らないんだ。
Feminism. Women get treated no differently than animals. There you go. You want your feminist message? 11 out of 10 game. I can't remember the last time that I've been genuinely disgusted with a video game. And that is not an exaggeration. This is not one of those cases where I just tell you, oh, another modern game sucks. But yes, this game does suck, but that's besides the point. That's just a dime a dozen in this era. No, Silent Hill F genuinely disgusted me. This game is some of the most overt anti-natalism, anti-marriage propaganda that I've seen in years. I think it's pretty clear that the F in the title stands for feminism. And let's forget the fact that this clearly is not a good Silent Hill game. It's not a good game, period. The combat is like bad Dark Souls. And for some reason, there's a devil trigger from Devil May Cry in this as well. It is some of the most clunky jank combat, and not in the way that, oh, classic survival horror games had bad combat, so it's okay for this to have bad combat too. First of all, that's a lie. There's nothing wrong with classic survival horror gameplay, no matter how much revisionist history shill YouTubers tell you. There is nothing wrong with the classic Resident Evil or Silent Hill games. You can play them right now and have a good time. This combat system was genuinely infuriating. And you might be thinking to yourself, okay, so it's more left-wing propaganda and the combat's bad. Is it at least scary? No, it's not scary either. Half the game is brightly lit. As in the actual town segments with all the fog, not the least bit scary, man. And even in the dream world segments, whatever you want to call the marriage allegory parts of this game, those aren't scary either, because that's where you power up to your demon form and just beat the shit out of enemies past the halfway point in the game. Even if you take away the clear propaganda angle of this game, I don't think the story is good. In fact, it's ridiculous. I'm just going to spoil the whole game right here in the intro, so you better click off the vid now if you don't want to hear it. But basically, this entire game is just a hallucination, a drug trip. A depressed chick in her 20s is reminiscing about her teenage years. She pops some pills and then goes on a murder spree at her wedding. Somehow, the average Japanese woman, oh, she's a little taller than average, kills a bunch of grown-ass men and women with no guns. I guess she just beats them to death. She's that badass. This game is an absolute joke, dude. I cannot believe there's a prominent YouTuber, and I'm not going to say who it is, but you already know. Let's just say it involves increasing your skill upward in some way. Is saying this game is like a masterpiece and the future of Silent Hill. No, this is a horrific joke of a video game. Imagine comparing marriage to chopping off your arm and slicing your face off. Oh, and your husband, he can just mind control you with his voice, by the way. I don't care if Japan in the 60s, women had no rights. This game was released under the current political climate. They knew that this is left-wing propaganda. And the main writer for this is the guy who made Higurashi When They Cry, which is a pretty infamous series, and I know a lot of people like that, but just trust me, this is complete embarrassing slop. I don't care if he worked as a social worker once upon a time and witnessed a lot of abusive fathers who beat their wives and their children. This story is encouraging Japanese people not to get married or to have kids, when their country's birth rate is already in the toilet and has begun importing dangerous immigrants just like all the first world countries in the West. And why don't we take a moment and ask Western women how happy they are with their financial independence and sleeping around with hundreds of men in their 20s as they find themselves. Oh wait, they're the most miserable they have been in recent history. Even disregarding the propaganda aspect, the story is just very poorly written and makes Hinako, the main character, look like a selfish bitch who doesn't want to grow up, was a terrible friend when she was in high school, and is just generally unlikable the more that you find out about her. I mean, even reading her journal, what she thinks of her own parents, just puts a bad taste in my mouth and removes a huge ton of the psychological horror element of this game by just spelling out a lot of the already obvious symbolism to the player. This is a complete joke. I don't care how quote-unquote seriously the story is told. This is basically just about a woman who doesn't want to grow up and accept responsibility because she had abusive parents. Compare that to James Sunderland murdering his wife. Do you think that's on the same level of guilt of being drawn into Silent Hill? Actually, the term Silent Hill is never used in this game at any point. This is clearly originally not a Silent Hill game. Some people suspect it was a Fatal Frame game originally, where instead of it having this weird Dark Souls jank combat, it involved you taking photographs and then doing weird counterattacks on enemies. That's a possibility. It's also possible this was just a completely original IP that the Silent Hill name was slapped onto, because there's no way this shit would sell otherwise. And judging by the Steam player counts, this game probably didn't sell that well anyway. So once again, I'm kind of put into this situation where I'm reviewing a game that ultimately most people don't actually care about, but because it's pushing for left-wing propaganda in video games, I feel like I have to say something, especially since I was forcing myself through the absolutely abysmal combat. So all of that torture has to mean something, and that something is going to be this review, of course. So without further ado, here's Silent Hill F. Okay, as usual, I'm going to talk about the gameplay first because this is a video game. I know occasionally we get tourists here who are like,
why would he talk about gameplay first instead of explaining what the game is and what the story synopsis is?
I don't know, it's a video game and you're supposed to play those. It's an interactive medium. It's kind of the whole appeal. And I genuinely believe in this case, the gameplay is bad enough that it detracts from the entire experience. A game I played recently that no one cared about, Bloober Team's latest game, Chronos, The New Dawn. That game was basically just a shitty Dead Space, right? Regardless, if you're one of the 5 people who tried that game, I could see you enjoying it in spite of it being so inferior to other action horror games. In Silent Hill F's case, this is one of the worst combat systems I have ever experienced in any video game. I'm not exaggerating, I swear to you, this is one of the worst combat systems of all time, and I'm gonna try my best to explain why it was so painful. But first, before I say anything, I need to tell you, I played this game on hard. And this time, I actually have a good reason, because I promised myself I wasn't going to play a game on hard unless it's notoriously easy. The reason I picked hard for this game is because there's actually only 2 difficulty settings at the start. There's story, yes, they call it story, and hard. Now, I don't know about you, but every single modern video game I've ever played, story meant game journalist difficulty. That's what it means. So I have this dilemma where I have to choose between baby easy and hard is often unbalanced and basically untested. And there's several parts of this game that give me the impression they did not test hard difficulty very thoroughly. Now again, before any tourists decide to use this information against me, just saying, oh, well, you played on hard, of course it's hard, that means that invalidates all of your complaints. Most of my complaints would be exactly the same on normal difficulty, because I'd say about 90% of my frustration in this game had nothing to do with me dying, and everything to do with how fundamentally broken this combat system is on a basic level. Now, the first time I tried to record this segment, it ended up being about 20 minutes long. Yes, the majority of this video was just talking about the combat mechanics, and it's just because I could probably complain about it forever. But I know you're not really here to hear about that. You probably want to hear about the woke stuff, so I'll try to condense it as much as humanly possible, but I have a lot to say. So basically, imagine Demon's Souls or Dark Souls 1 combat combined with a generic cinematic Sony slop game with that over-the-shoulder combat and sliding forward to hit enemies, that kind of thing. There's no guns in this game, unlike pretty much every other Silent Hill. You're just a high school girl beating the shit out of horrific monsters with steel pipes. The basic combat mechanics are something you've heard 1,000 times before. You've got a light attack combo, a heavy attack combo, a dodge with invincibility frames, which has an insane amount of ending lag, and enemy hits can actually track you if you dodge too early as well. And on top of all that, dodging takes about 1/3 of your stamina bar on top of regular attacks also taking stamina. Oh, and I forgot to mention, when you use up your whole stamina bar, it takes several seconds to recover it. You are punished to an insane degree if you ever completely deplete your stamina. You might as well be fucking dead, because you can't run away, you can't attack, and you can't dodge, so you're just standing there, staring at the enemy, hoping they're not gonna kill you. Also, there's a perfect dodge in this game, which actually restores your stamina if you pull it off, but the timing is kind of tight. But enemies do not stop their attack combos once you perfect dodge, so oftentimes you'll dodge, try to get in a heavy attack, and then you'll just get smacked in the face anyway. You also have a faith meter, which is almost like a second stamina bar that is depleted when you're in focus mode, which is when you hold L2. What focus mode does is gives you access to a focus attack, which is a charge attack that can stun an enemy. Every enemy in this game has super armor, including against heavy attacks to a degree. There's like, I guess, a stagger meter. Like the basic mannequin doll enemy types you can stun with a heavy attack, but some of the other enemies you can't. Oh, and every time you hit an enemy, there's an insane amount of hit stop. Like, the whole game stops for like half a second to make it seem really like actiony and over the top. This teenage girl is supremely powerful. I have no idea what the hell they were thinking with this. It's almost antithetical to having horror in your horror game. But more importantly, focus mode does something that basically completely breaks the combat system. It gives you access to a counter. Certain enemy attacks can be countered. Basically, every enemy type has at least one that can be. And you can either counter it manually by pressing R2 whenever you see a flash, though the window's pretty tight. Or more likely, you're going to hold L2 and wait for the enemy to go into the animation. Of course, if you hold L2 too long, it'll drain a bunch of your faith meter, and your faith meter is incredibly important for making this combat go smoothly. But assuming you do pick the correct attack to counter, it freezes time for like 2 straight seconds, which is a really long time to react. And then you press heavy attack and you get this insanely strong counter, which also lets you get a follow-up combo afterward. Just one counter is enough to kill any of the most basic enemy type in the game. So it's obviously what you're going to do against every single doll, scarecrow, whatever the fuck, which you fight like 1,000 of these over the course of the game. There's only 5 enemy types, not including the 3 main bosses. So you're going to do the same thing over and over and over again. You know, kind of just like the Silent Hill 2 remake, except it's actually worse in this game because there's less combat options. If you flail with R1 and R2, you're gonna get your ass beat in this game, because one of the main enemy types is like this lanky, gangly man who just attacks like a fucking berserk Elden Ring enemy, doing random ass shit. Most of his attacks can't be countered. And there's a lot of hit stun in this game as well, so he can actually combo your ass and deplete like half your health bar on hard difficulty off of one attack. Oh, and of course, I can't forget, past the halfway point in the game, during just the dream segments, as I told you in the intro, as an allegory for marriage, Hinako voluntarily slices one of her own arms off and stitches this huge demonic fox arm onto her body, which gives her devil trigger from the Devil May Cry games. You build up a meter by absorbing enemy souls, and then you become invincible for like 30 seconds and just start beating the shit out of enemies with your giant arm. This is the most anti-horror thing I have ever seen in my life, dude. It's kind of hilarious in a way, and almost fun. Still not quite fun because of like the jank factor, but at least it added a little bit of variety that the gameplay desperately needed. Too bad that you couldn't use it during the town segments of the game. Anyway, to get back to the point, it doesn't take a genius to see where I'm going with this. If light and heavy attacks make no sense to just pull out randomly, and dodging is only questionably useful, that leaves one option. You just spam counters over and over and over again for the entire game, because it is by far the best way of dealing with enemies, and while yes, it costs a valuable resource, it is something that can be restored with consumable items. So you may be asking, how could this combat system possibly be incredibly infuriating if all you have to do is walk up to an enemy and hold L2 and then press R2 when the time is right? Well, the answer to that is simple. As I already said, there's a lot of attacks that can't be countered, and the later you get in the game, the less likely enemies are going to use that attack, because there's like pseudo palette swaps in this game, in the sense that I think the AI actually gets smarter, because there's many times in the later half of the game where I'll hold L2 and the enemies will just stand there and not attack. Now, of course, you can always use a focus attack so you don't drain your entire bar. But focus attacks don't stun as long as a counter. They don't do as much damage as a counter either. So it's more of a consolation prize than anything. You end up using a bunch of meter of the most valuable resource. And then if you're fighting multiple enemies, which happens a lot in this game, then you can very likely get counterattacked and lose a bunch of health. Silent Hill F is 100% an action game. Even though you can run past anywhere from a third to half of the enemies, there's many points in this game where you are forced to kill every enemy to proceed. And even if you aren't, it's very unlikely you're going to run past some of these enemies. Those gangly male enemies I mentioned before can actually run faster than you and jab you in the back as you try to escape. I had to backtrack at one point during the final dungeon in your house, which required me to run through a narrow hallway with two of these motherfuckers nipping at my ankles, and I don't think I've gotten that pissed running away in a video game ever in my life. I haven't even mentioned all of the times in this game that have borderline forced damage. I'm not going to say that these are completely unreactable, but it definitely feels like trial and error gameplay, where they'll hide enemies around corners, and then they instantly do a grab animation on you that you probably have less than a fifth of a second to press circle to dodge. Or they'll have the mannequin guys crawl on the ceiling, and then they make a very quiet sound cue, which I couldn't even hear with the volume turned up and my headphones on while I was streaming. And then they jump on top of you and slice half your health bar off. Absolutely infuriating. I haven't even talked about the most annoying enemy type in the game yet, the one that represents motherhood. This disgusting abomination covered with giant titties that births enemies out of its lower lips. I'm not even sure I can show this thing on YouTube without the video getting age restricted. But it doesn't take a genius to figure out why this enemy is so obnoxious. Basically, it pops out these little fetus egg things, and if you don't kill them, it spawns an enemy, right? And as I told you, every 2v1 situation in this game is going to make you sweat. So you go over to the egg, you start hitting it, and then the fat bitch spits acid on your head, which stuns you just long enough so that the egg is time to hatch. Once it starts the hatching animation, you can't stop it anymore. And you fight this bitch like 10 times over the course of the game. She's an absolute damage sponge. She rarely ever uses her counterable attack, and it takes a hell of a lot of strong attacks to stun her. And even if you master the strategy of just killing the eggs in time while dodging so that it's always a 1v1 fight, in the dream sequence there's an encounter with her that is an unavoidable 2v1 because they hide one of the dolls on the ceiling, so it'll jump on your head, slice off half your health bar, and then immediately you're thrown into the fight and can't do anything about it. Holy fuck, I was getting so tilted at this one point in the game, it was unreal. Make it stop, bro. Alright. I invincibility framed my way out of the grab. That's good. Oh, and then I got grabbed. Oh, you can't make this up. Yeah, let's just... Hey, the other one should now use grab. And then the other one can use grab. And then the other one can use grab. And then the other one can use grab. I think that's a great idea. And then call them DSP if they fuck it up. The AI, the enemy AI in this game is infuriating. If I stare at them, they won't attack for 10 minutes. If I'm not locked onto them, shank, 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 shank in the back, shank. All of this talk about the combat, and I haven't even mentioned the survival horror mechanics yet. Yes, there is resource management in this game, and it is some of the most annoying I have ever seen. Not only do you have an inventory limit that is ever so slowly expanded over the course of the game, but you have a quick select limit too. Despite there only being 8 quick slots, there's about 12 consumable items. And the consumable items only stack up to 3, or in the case of the first aid kit, only 1. So many times you're gonna have to pause the game and rearrange your quick select items in the middle of combat. Takes you out of the horror experience even more than the idea of a high school girl beating the fuck out of horrific monsters with a pipe. And there's items that exist solely to sell them so that you get faith points, or whatever the currency is called, I already forgot, so that you can upgrade your character and use the gacha system. Yes, this game actually has an in-game gacha system for omomoris, which are like charms that give you buff effects. So my inventory ended up being too full to pick up any more items about a dozen times over the course of the game, causing more unnecessary trips back to the bonfire just so I could sell stuff, so I could keep playing the game. The worst part is it didn't have to be this way. Half of the items do almost exactly the same thing. Out of those 12 consumables, like 6 of them heal your health, with functionally no difference except the appearance of the item itself, and in a couple cases, how long it takes to use it. The food items can be consumed instantly, whereas the bandage takes a long time to heal you, which can sometimes get you killed. Another added survival horror element is that weapons have durability in this game. Now, normally I despise weapon durability, but believe it or not, it was rarely a problem in this game. Even on hard, I was never at risk at any point except near the very end of having all my weapons break. There's actually many points where I would discover a weapon and not be able to pick it up because you can only hold 3 at a time. Oh, and if you're wondering if there's any meaningful difference between the weapon types, really it's just attack speed, and in the case of the heavy weapons, you can actually block with them while holding L2, which is actually kind of a neat feature, except it depletes the weapon's durability, so I honestly didn't block very many attacks over the course of the game. I don't really have anything else to say about weapon durability. It's just kind of a tacked on element that doesn't really add anything, but honestly doesn't take away anything either. One of the consumable items in this game, the Higurashi, is completely broken and almost makes this combat fun. It gives you infinite stamina for about 30 seconds, which is more than enough to clear a combat encounter, or in the case of the Dark Souls-esque boss fights, makes them significantly easier. A lot of the general jankness is considerably less frustrating when you can dodge an attack whenever you want without having to worry about depleting your whole bar and then getting beaten to death in an instant. The thing is, these things are rare enough that you're only going to want to use them against the 3 main bosses. And to briefly touch on those, they are just straight up Dark Souls bosses in the sense that they can kill you in like 2 or 3 hits. They do these long attack combos with huge sweeping moves. And this is the one time in the game where you're going to be dodging a lot, because it is the main way to avoid the attacks. I know I'm beating this point like a dead horse, but does this look like a horror game to you, or does this look like an action RPG or a hack and slash game? Fighting the bosses is the only time that the combat system felt semi-competent, and even then, it's not like I really enjoyed them because I'm so sick of Souls-likes as it is. Now, I could probably continue to rant about this combat for another 10 minutes, but in the interest of time, I'll just try to summarize why it's such an irritating jank fest. Though I think a lot of this B-roll probably speaks for itself. It's a combination of extreme repetition, a terrible camera angle that gets stuck in walls when the fat fucks get too close to you. Of course, you have the very flawed attack and dodge system, meaning that light and heavy attacks are often very unreliable. Dodging has a lot of lag, so if you fuck up the timing, you can easily get punished heavily and have to waste precious healing items. Focus attacks being usable, but draining a lot of your faith meter unless you have an Omamori to reduce the amount of faith you're using. And of course, reliable, the counter, which is actually way too effective to the point of being the only thing you'll probably want to use. So the meta of this game ends up being one of the most boring things you could possibly do, which is walking up slowly to an enemy and then holding L2 right before it attacks, and then pressing R2 and then beating it to death. Which naturally, the genius devs at Neobards thought the only way to make the game more challenging is having enemies past the halfway point either stand around and do nothing, letting you drain your faith as you hold L2, or they use an uncounterable attack that is often too fast to react to with the dodge. The terrible cinematic camera often makes it so you can't see enemies attacking you from behind or the sides, and there's no indicator of when they're about to hit you. And of course, if you ever run out of stamina, which is likely going to happen if you're panic dodging, you just have to stand around like a sitting duck and hope the enemies don't grab you or beat the shit out of you. Or the game just straight up forcing you to kill all of the enemies to proceed, which it does many times in the last 2 hours of the game. And slowly, all of your accumulated resources are drained, and it feels like there's nothing you can do about it. It is not fun. It is not meaningfully challenging in any way. It is padding, plain and simple, and it has no place in this game. This is not a survival horror game. This is a really bad action game with a horror coat of paint. Alright, finally moving on. In the interest of time, I'm going to condense a lot of my thoughts on all the other aspects of this game pretty briefly, just so that we can get to the story analysis. As for level design, there's not much to talk about here. The game is mostly linear, even more linear than previous games in the series, I would argue. There's a bit of an illusion of exploration, some optional little side areas with supplies, and during the Shinto temple dream sequences, the map has the illusion of being labyrinthine in nature, but it's still a linear path. You just have to figure out where you're supposed to go. Also, it bears repeating that this game is not the least bit scary. I know that is subjective, and I'm the type of guy who doesn't get scared easily with horror games, so I would probably say that about 80 to 90% of all games in this genre ever released. However, there are a few basic objective things that I think detract from the horror no matter who you are. The obvious thing I already went over is that there's way too many combat encounters and there's not enough enemy variety, so once you understand an enemy, they're not scary anymore. Especially since this is an action game instead of a survival horror game, so instead of managing your resources, you're slowly getting better at the game over time. And the more confident you are, the less scary the game is. The other obvious thing is that the game is too fucking bright, especially during the town segments. I don't care how dense the fog is, this just doesn't look scary in any conceivable way. Other than that, I think the game is just kind of lazy about the whole horror aspect in general. There's not enough true psychological horror in this game, which is ironic given the nature of the twist of this game. You would think if nothing you see is real, the game would go way more over the top messing with Hinako's head. But I think the only time the game is kind of experimental with that is in the house dungeon, and even then it's pretty tame. Of course, aside from fighting a bunch of enemies going from point A to point B, there's also quite a few puzzles. I'd say for the most part, the puzzles are pretty simple. There were only a couple that truly stumped me. One that got to a lot of people, which is the box puzzle. I'm not going to go into it, but it was a problem of simultaneously the clue being too vague, and you also had to have somewhat of an understanding of Japanese culture to even know what the solution is. I'm not really a weeb, and the way the puzzle is designed doesn't even make it clear how many images you're supposed to select for each solution because it changes with each of the 3 levels, which makes what should be a really simple and easy puzzle a matter of trial and error. Though if I have to praise one aspect of the game, there was one legitimately good puzzle that also, coincidentally, was arguably the scariest part of the entire game. When you're trapped in the dense fog in the rice fields and you have to select the correct scarecrow. Normally getting really close to horror enemies would make them less scary, but knowing that they could jump and attack you at any moment if you picked the wrong one was actually really tense, and in later parts of this segment, a couple of the scarecrows actually move towards you when you turn away from them, which I know is a concept that's been done in a lot of other horror media, but it still adds to the overall tension of you wanting to figure out the puzzle as soon as possible so you don't get stabbed in the back. Also, since this is an Unreal Engine 5 game, I will briefly comment on performance. I'll definitely say it's above average for a UE5 game, but there's definitely still stuttering, specifically in the town segments. I've heard claims the game runs perfectly. That is a fucking lie. I have the footage to prove it, but it definitely wasn't bad enough to distract from the experience. And as for the visual aesthetic design of everything, it just kind of looks like a traditional Japanese town. It's set in the 60s, and of course it's got the trademark Silent Hill fog. There's this red rot everywhere that's supposed to represent death that follows you. And the dream world segments are like in traditional Japanese temples, and I really don't have much to say about that. I guess it's a vaguely interesting setting contrasting with the small-town American vibes of the other Silent Hill games, but if you play a lot of Japanese games, I'm sure you've seen all this shit before. The enemy symbolism in this game is pretty obvious. The doll or mannequin-type enemies are supposed to represent other high school students. The gangly, lanky dudes are obviously supposed to represent men. The giant fat dude with a butcher blade is just straight up revealed to represent your father. And the obese titty monsters represent motherhood. The bosses also have pretty obvious symbolism. The first one being the friend that Hinako abandoned. The second being her romantic rival, who is in love with Shu, which is basically Hinako's childhood friend that she friend-zoned. She admits at multiple multiple points she had no intention of dating him, yet she's still upset and jealous at Rinko for wanting to date him, and so the two hate each other. Am I supposed to feel sympathetic for Hinako? She's just as much of a fucking bitch as any of the other women in this game. As for the story, I'm not going to go too in-depth here because I pretty much covered all the major points in the intro. Basically, this game is split into two parts. You have the town parts and you have the dream sequences. The town parts are Hinako reminiscing about her teenage years, while the dream sequences are an allegory for women losing their identity when they get married. Sure, I could go into a lot of details of the story, but honestly, the characters are not that deep. They're pretty one note, so there's not that much to talk about. Sakuko, the forgotten friend, only has like 30 seconds of screen time in the beginning. Rinko is the typical rival girl, like I said before, who hates Hinako's guts and wants to get with Shu. And Shu is just the boy next door childhood friend character. Of course, in the dream sequences, you have Hinako's fiancé in their arranged marriage, and he is represented as a demonic fox spirit, you know, a kitsune for all you weebs out there. Of course, you have Hinako's parents, with the father being a stereotypical alcoholic, abusive dad, and the mother being the complete pushover who's basically a servant to her husband. Now, of course, in a vacuum, I don't think it's feminist or left-wing propaganda to represent an abusive father in a video game. There's many of those in real life, but I think it is pretty telling how Hinako describes both of her parents in her journal in-game. And Hinako despising her mother just for wanting to keep the peace and not getting divorced seems very petty and childish from a woman that's actually in her 20s. Even if it is framed as her being a teenager for most of the game, it's revealed she's actually an adult in the end. And of course, the final character, one of the villains of the story, is Hinako's older sister, Junko. And Junko is framed as a villain just because she left the family to go get married. That's all she actually does wrong, by the way, since the whole game is just a drug trip. Everything else is just a figment of Hinako's imagination, that she's eternally pissed at her sister for daring to get a life. If I'm being charitable, she's really mad just because no one was there to defend her anymore from the horrific parents. But the main antagonist of this game turns out to be you, more specifically, the Hinako from the dream sequence that becomes like a fox demon. And so the final boss is Hinako just fighting the Dark Souls demon version of herself. But in the bad ending, she ends up just taking all the drugs and murdering all the people at the wedding, I guess is what that part represents, right? She gets high as fuck and kills the concept of marriage by murdering her husband and all the people there or something. Again, I don't even know what to take away from this story other than the propaganda angle. It just seems like complete nonsense to me. But the way this game's story is told feels so pretentious, like it's digging at this deeper message somewhere, but there isn't one. The first time you play this game, you get locked into a bad ending. No matter what your choices are, you get the same one every time, and then on subsequent playthroughs, to get better endings, you have to never use the red pill item throughout the game, since, as I already told you, the pills are what created this drug-fueled massacre in the first place. But I'm not going to torture myself by playing through this whole game again. Yes, there are some changes in the cutscenes on New Game Plus, but you still have to suffer through the combat, as I said earlier in this video. So let's just get to the whole woke element of this game, even though I've sort of already covered the basics on that. Although I got a lot of my rage out during the intro about the overall feminist message of this game, I think it bears repeating again how ridiculous it is in this day and age that we're getting yet another game pushing for anti-natalism and anti-marriage messaging when women are more unhappy now than they have been in any other point in the past 100 years. Yes, even under the horrifying nuclear family, marriage is like slavery. It's like giving up your identity. You have to do everything your husband says. No, it's much better to be a career woman and work until you're 40, have no fucking kids, your egg carton's empty, you got 5 cats and are constantly stinking a piss, still chasing the high of that Chad who fucked you one time when you were 20. I mean, come on, do I even need to tell you how ridiculous it is to equate marriage to chopping your arm off, slicing your face off, getting a huge ass brand on your back, and your husband literally having mind control over you? Can you imagine if somebody made a game about marriage today and it showed the horrors of the divorce court with women taking half of the man's money, having custody of the kids, showing how these single mothers subtly abuse and neglect their children? They end up being these soy boy redditor cuckolds when they grow up. Obviously, everyone would call that right-wing propaganda, but this game comes out and some major reviewers are shilling the hell out of it, calling it some kind of deep artistic masterpiece or some shit. I feel like anyone with a working brain and even a modicum of maturity, because I certainly consider myself pretty immature, all things considered, but even I thought this is just edgelord shit, the cringe kind, where Hinako thinks marriage is so fucking horrible, it's like brutally mutilating yourself and losing your entire identity. It frames this whole story as a melodramatic bout of hysteria from a drugged up woman, and she's actually rewarded by being able to somehow murder a bunch of people at her wedding, which is such a dog shit twist ending because of how ridiculous it is. How am I supposed to take this story seriously on any level when it is cartoon shit? Silent Hill is not cartoon shit, man. This is a joke. Another conspiracy-esque element you can think about is Japan's birth rates are lower than ever, and they're also importing more immigrants than any other point in their history, much like every first world country in the West right now. So again, do not doubt for a second, this is more globo homo propaganda. Shinzo Abe is rolling in his grave right now seeing this shit. And to add to the absurdity, this game was developed by Neobards, the shitheads who made that terrible Dead Rising Deluxe remaster last year. They are a Hong Kong-based company. So this is a Chinese game telling Japanese people to not get married and to not have kids. Are you gonna tell me right now that isn't propaganda? You can call me a schizo if you'd like. That is 100% on purpose. Despite my numerous significant complaints with this game, while I was editing this video, I decided to play a little bit of New Game Plus on story difficulty. Just out of pure morbid curiosity, I wanted to see how much easier the game is, and holy fuck, the enemies only do like half as much damage and take less hits to kill on top of that. I know it's just a stupid meme on a certain basket weaving forum, but I genuinely believe if you played this on story difficulty, you didn't beat the game. Regardless, I decided to do the UFO ending since you can do it in like the first 3 hours. And man, they even found a way to mess up a joke ending. At first, it's actually pretty cute. It's just a series of manga panels with an old traditional art style. And all the weird happenings in the town are obviously explained with an alien invasion. And the giant faceless wedding creature, the other half of Hinako, is actually a robot that Sakuko built to find the aliens. But then there's a really cringy joke about Shu being a perv and all the women beat the shit out of him. Yeah, man, this is just fucking cringe. But in any case, I thought this was worth mentioning for the video. Let's wrap this shit up. So in conclusion, should you buy this game? Hell no. This game pissed me off in many different ways. I can't even remember the last time I've gotten this enraged by a single player game. And it's not just because of the propaganda, it's not even just because of the gameplay. This is an insult to Silent Hill. It's an insult to the horror genre. It doesn't do anything right. It's not scary. It's not fun. It doesn't tell a good story. And yet there are people on this platform, my fellow YouTubers, who highly recommend this game and say it's the future of the franchise. What a fucking joke, man. It's incredibly obvious that Neobards was trying to make a Silent Hill game for women, and the worst kind of woman at that, the far leftist, communist, champagne socialist feminist type, who absolutely despises men and other women, and her parents, and basically everyone, and yet we're supposed to feel sorry for her. So it's a Silent Hill for Karens, basically. Wow, what a concept. I don't want to go over all the flaws with this game again for this conclusion. You're just gonna have to actually watch the video this time if you're one of the people who skipped to the end. I don't even want to talk about this game ever again. Genuinely, what a horrific waste of my time. Hopefully we all forget about this game in a week and just move on to the next slop. Like Ghost of Yote, which no doubt my review will enrage a lot of people. Well, I'm looking forward to crapping all over Sony fans again. So that's about it. See you next time, guys.